Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Exit from Exile Precon from Battle for Baldur's Gate and its face commander, Faldorn Dreadwolf Herald, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what commanders you'll be voting for an upcoming episode. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Faldorn Dreadwolf Herald is a 3/3 human druid that costs 1, a red and a green with the following abilities. Whenever we cast a spell from exile or our land enters the battlefield under our control from exile, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. Pay 1, tap Faldorn and discard a card to exile a top card of our library and play that card until the end of the turn. Breaking down her core stats, Faldorn is sporting a relatively low CMC, a typical stat block for her cost, and a pair of abilities that allow her to grow our board with 2/2 wolf creature tokens as we cast our spells or play lands from exile, while also giving us the option to pitch a card from our hand to turn it into an impulse cantrip to enable herself. Looking at her second ability first, it's simply an on-theme cantrip effect to help us get cards into exile to play and cast. While not too terribly powerful, the fact that it discards a card can be used in conjunction with cards that care about being discarded to get extra value out of them, and at worst can be used to pitch dead cards out of our hands to dig deeper into our deck for better ones. Her first ability, however, is why we're here, as it tacks on a 2/2 wolf token to every spell we cast and every land we play from exile. Our colors have no shortage of effects that let us cast or play cards from exile to proc this, whether they be impulse draw effects to allow us to dig deeper into our deck for more resources, or mechanics like adventure, foretell, cascade, and more that allow us to get the cards themselves or others into exile to cast or play later, easily allowing us to get a lot of mileage out of this ability to flood our board with an army of tokens. And the fact that these tokens are wolves is relevant as well, as our colors have plenty of support for this tribe to make them even deadlier, alongside more traditional payoffs that take advantage of the wide board states we're able to create to power them up as well. So, based on her abilities, we can see that Faldorn wants us to go deep into casting from exile to flood our board with wolf tokens, which is why this upgrade will aim to do just that, adding in even more repeatable ways to cast from exile, plenty of ramp to ensure that we have the mana we need to cast our exiled spells in the limited window we have to do so, and a good number of ways to grow our wolves into real threats so they can tear our opponent's life totals to shreds. From the exile front, the core build already has a solid number of impulse draw and other forms of cast from exile effects, so we'll be adding even more to ensure a good chunk of our cards create tokens for us as we play or cast them, alongside means to exile and cast our opponent's cards for the same results. Then looking at our ramp, the base build has an insane ramp package right out of the box with plenty of powerful staples to grow our mana base, but we'll be refining it even further to ensure that none of our exiled spells go to waste before we're able to cast them. And finally, we'll be adding finishers that the core build lacks to turn our vanilla 2/2 wolves into real threats, granting them powerful stat boosts and trample to ensure they can run over any defenses our opponents are able to muster. So, let's turn the fury of nature loose against our opponents, a task that the Shadow Druid Faldorn is only too happy to be a part of. For too long has she been forced to watch the races of Faerun mercilessly exploit the bounty of nature for their own selfish desires, but no longer. Now she and her wolves will teach those who harm nature a very painful lesson on where they belong on the food chain, a lesson that they are unlikely to survive. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting with our kept creatures, we'll primarily be focusing on keeping bodies that can either cast themselves from exile or allow us to cast other cards from exile instead. Beginning in the former camp, both Embereth Shieldbreaker and Bone Crusher Giant stay in as forms of removal we can later cast from exile thanks to adventure to proc our commander, as does Beanstalk Giant, who's a decent source of ramp instead and we can later drop as an enormous beatstick that takes full advantage of our potent land ramp package. The new Tlinkali Hunter then wraps up our adventure holdovers, serving as both an enormous trampling beatstick and a potent cast from exile payoff that lets us cast our exiled creatures for free, while its adventure throws in some exile-based recursion as a bonus. Then moving on to some foretell holdovers, Green Slime makes it in as a solid and cheap removal source that can both counter powerful abilities and destroy their sources, and Battle Mammoth holds on to its spot by being a huge beater we can foretell out relatively cheaply, and providing our entire board with a ward-like draw effect to deter our opponents from targeting our creatures or at least letting us cantrip when they're removed. a pair of cascade creatures, and close out our keyworded exile mechanics, with Bloodbraid Elf being a decent on-curve body that brings an exiled 3 CMC spell or less when we cast it to proc our commander and other payoffs, and Wild Magic Sorcerer being a powerful payoff that tacks on the cascade keyword to the first spell we cast from exile each turn, potentially generating us an absurd amount of value through free spells the longer we can keep it around. Some kept creature-based sources of Impulse Draw are then up next, with Layla the Blade Reforged staying in as an attack-focused form of Impulse Draw that's also an ever-growing threat that takes advantage of all our other Impulse Draw sources, and Tectonic Giant remaining as another form of Impulse Draw and attack, or alternatively as a source of AoE burn if we need to close out games. The new legend Durin of the Yawning Portal also keeps his spot as a source of pseudo-impulse draw, allowing us to dig deeper into our deck as he swings to find creatures and casting them from exile at a discount indefinitely, making him both an impressive source of repeatable card advantage and ramp for the creatures he exiles. Creatures that let us exile and cast our opponent's cards are then up next, with Direfleet Daredevil making it in as a cheap body that lets us steal instants and sorceries from our opponent's bins to use ourselves, and Atali Primal Storm of course keeping its spot by being a powerful repeatable source of free spells off the top of our opponent's decks as well as our own, provided of course we can complete the monumental task of keeping it alive until it gets back to us so we can swing in with it. And as our last exile-focused creature that made the grade, we have Nalfeshni, which is a potent exile payoff that effectively doubles the value we get from casting exiled spells by copying them, while also being a decent-sized evasive beatstick to help us pile on the damage. And then we close out our kept creatures with Sakura Tribe Elder, who provides the build with some staple land-based ramp to help speed up and fix our mana base on the cheap. Moving on to our instant carryovers, Demon Bolt remains as a very cheap source of creature or walker removal to easily deal with threats while proccing our commander if foretold, as does Delayed Blast Fireball, which we can scale between a one-sided mini-wipe and a full-blown one depending on whether we foretell it or not, and even getting its powered up mode at a discount if we're able to cast it from exile through other means. Then we close out our instance with a pair of non-exile focused entrants. Beast Within carrying over by being a superb piece of removal that deals with almost any type of permanent threat we may encounter for relatively little cost, and Return of the Wild Speaker stays in as either a form of card advantage that can make use of our large creatures to reload our hands, or instead be used as an instant speed AoE pump to power up our wolf tokens to alpha strike our opponents and close out games. Proceeding to our kept sorceries, we'll of course be keeping the excellent ramp package consisting of Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, Cultivate, and Kodama's Reach, all of which provide us with exceptional ramp right out of the box to help us speed up and fix our mana base very efficiently. Search for Tomorrow also keeps its spot as a land ramp source. It's a spend allowing us to cast it early and allowing us to proc our commander when it comes off suspend if played later. The part ramp and part impulse draw cards Jeska's Will and Escape to the Wilds will also carry over from the core build, the former providing us with a huge burst of red mana and cards from our deck to spend it on, and the latter's additional land drop and until end of next turn impulse draw letting us both build up our mana base, and giving us additional time to assemble the mana we need to cast any high CMC spells we hit off the top with it. The pure impulse draw spells Light Up the Stage and Ignite the Future will be staying in as well, the former being castable for only a single mana if we're able to get damage in, which should be pretty easy considering we have a go-wide game plan, and the latter being castable twice per game thanks to Flashback, and the second time around even allowing us to cast the exiled cards for free to hopefully get us even more value. Mizium Mortars then closes out our kept sorceries, either serving as a cheap if slow single target removal option or a one-sided board wipe if we scale it up with Overload, which are nice options to have if we're casting off the top with low mana or need to keep our board states intact. Kept enchantments are then up next, with Outpost Siege carrying over as a simple and repeatable source of impulse draw to keep proccing our commander's token creation turn after turn with minimal setup, and Stolen Strategy remaining in by effectively letting us draw 4 cards each turn, 3 of which proc our commander and allowing us to steal our opponent's cards to give us some additional tactical options. Continuing on to our artifact holdovers, the Mana Rock Soul Ring and Arcane Signet keep their spots by providing us with additional ramp to help speed up and or fix our mana base to help us cast our exiled spells, and Chaos Wand stays in as a repeatable way to dig into our opponent's decks to steal their instants and sorceries for only 4 mana a pop, which will usually net us a bigger spell than we pay to activate it and proc our commander as a bonus. Our lone kept Planeswalker is then up next, with Xenagos the Reveler making the grade primarily as a superb piece of ramp that takes full advantage of our go-wide game plan to generate a potentially insane amount of mana, but his token creation being nice to build up our board state, and his ult being a solid source of impulse draw if we can get to it in the late game. And finally, reaching our kept land base, Command Tower stays in as a reliable source of mana derived from our commander's color identity. The dual land Cinderglade, Game Trail, and Mossfire Valley remain in by providing solid fixing that usually comes into play untapped to not slow down our mana base. Temple of Abandon hangs on to its spot despite coming into play tapped thanks to its fixing and ETB Scry helping the deck's consistency. And Blighted Woodland and Myriad Landscape stay in as well thanks to the ramp they provide us access to from the land slot. The hideaway lands, Mosswort Bridge and Spine Rock Knoll of course also keep their spots, both being relatively easy ways to not only cast from exile, but also doing so for a significant discount depending on the exiled card. Then for kept utility lands, Castle Lembrith stays in due to being a battle cry effect from our land slot to pump our token heavy build at instant speed if needed, as does Kessig Wolfrun by instead pumping a single target massively and granting it trample to more easily allow our tokens to trade or just get in for more damage if unblocked. And finally, 11 mountains and 12 forests make it in as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 70 cards including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 30 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Starting with our creature upgrades, we'll be focusing on refining our ability to cast from exile, as well as powering up and getting additional value out of the huge amount of wolf tokens we'll be creating. Firstly, the haste-enabling legend Urabrask the Hidden will be cut in favor of his more recent incarnation, Urabrask Heretic Praetor, who serves as a continual source of impulse draw for us to enable our commander and other payoffs, while simultaneously hampering our opponents by turning their first drop or turn into impulse draw that they will either have to play immediately or lose forever. The token creators Hornet Queen and Arast of the Endless Web will then lose their spots, as we'll be getting more than enough token creation from our commander, and will be replaced with Containment Construct and Conspiracy Theorist, both of which synergize perfectly with our commander to still let us play the card we discard to activate her ability from exile to proc her again. Then we'll be axing the subpar exile-focused bodies Sweetgum Recluse, Dream Pillager, and Izzet Chemister, who are either too slow or too expensive for us to make the most use out of in this build, and swapping in Professional Facebreaker, Kami of Celebration, and Caves of Chaos Adventurer in their place, all of which are reliable sources of impulse draw to ensure we're continually proccing our commander, while also providing ramp, +1/+1 counter distribution, and eventually free spells respectively. Then switching gears from exiling cards to powering up our board, we'll be replacing Grumgully the Generous, whose counter distribution is nice but doesn't help us too much if we play him on a already established board state, with Loyal Guardian, whose repeatable counter distribution is much easier for us to use to power up our board once we've already set it up, and cutting the powerful but mana-hungry finisher and race 4 runners for the equally powerful but cheaper Thunderfoot Baloth, who still provides an AoE pump and trample and keeps providing it so long as it sticks around in case we're forced to cast it off the top to not lose it. We'll then be swapping in a handful of wolf-focused upgrades by swapping out the mediocre Lovestruck Beast and Aura Phoenix to make room for Nightpack Ambusher and Master of the Wild Hunt, both of which provide our build with even more wolf token generation and payoffs for them in the form of their AoE pump and ability to turn them into removal respectively, as well as swapping out the incredibly slow Greater Gargadon for the legend Tovolar Dire Overlord, who turns all our wolf tokens into repeatable sources of card advantage, and, once transformed, gives us access to another Kessig Wolfrun on our body to get even more damage through. Then as our last wolf-focused upgrade, we'll be replacing the powerful but out-of-place Mana Gorger Hydra with the more on-theme Hollow Henge Overlord, whose combination of flash and ability to double up on our wolves every turn easily allows us to turn an impressive board state into an overwhelming one. And finally, we'll wrap up our new creature additions by swapping out the middling land Ash Barrens for the far more useful Goblin Anarchomancer, whose cost reduction for all our non-colorless spells goes a long way to ensure we can cast them from exile during the limited time we can do so. Moving on to our instant upgrades, the only change we'll be making here will be cutting the very slow Natural Reclamation for the much better removal option Chaos Warp, which, despite not fitting into our exile-based playstyle, is still a powerful and flexible removal option that's worth running to help us deal with any type of threats our opponents throw our way. Then quickly running down our sorcery upgrades, the subpar ramp spell Explore will be replaced with a much better ramp spell Farseek to help us speed up and fix our mana base much more reliably. The tad bit overcosted Terramorph and Venture Forth will be cut in favor of Reckless Impulse and Rob the Archives to give our build even more access to cheap impulse draw to work alongside our commander. The hard to set up Volcanic Torrents will be axed in favor of Hull Breach, and it's much easier to enable and frequently 2-for-1 back row removal. And the powerful but expensive wipe Azuri's Predation will be swapped out for the cheaper Vandal Blast instead, which is much easier to cast off the top if exiled to get value out of it instead of letting it go to waste. Enchantment upgrades are then up next, with the awkward to use Journey to the Lost City being replaced with the cheaper and more reliable Sylvan Anthem to pump all our wolves and turn them into card selection as they come into play. The powerful but ultimately too slow Primeval Bounty losing its spot to Beastmaster's Ascension to more easily allow our tokens to overrun our opponents with its massive and easy to enable AoE pump, and the far too expensive Sandworm Convergence being swapped out for Glorious Sunrise, which hits the board much earlier and whose ability to draw us cards, ramp us, pump the board, and even gain us life makes it much more useful than its predecessor. And lastly, the powerful but overcosted for this build Warstorm Surge will be exchanged out in favor of Valakut Exploration, which provides us another source of impulse draw that also doubles as AoE burn if we need to push for lethal instead. Reaching our artifact upgrades, we'll first be replacing the expensive mana rock Saravok's Tome with the significantly cheaper Wayfarer's Bauble instead, which ramps us earlier and fixes our colors, which is very important to help us get our commander out as soon as possible. Then we'll be adding some ways to protect our commander, swapping out the unimpressive lands Temple of the False Gods and Gruul Turf for the equipment Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, whose targeted removal, protection, and haste enabling both keep our commander alive and let her use her tap ability right away, as well as protecting our other powerful targets like Atali who would otherwise be removed before the turn got back to us. And as our last artifact change, we'll be cutting Passionate Archaeologist, whose single target burn would be more impressive from the command zone and if our commander was bigger than a 3/3, and replacing it with Wand of Wonder, which, like Chaos Wand, lets us cast our opponent's instants and sorceries, but gives us even more options and often lets us cast more than one when doing so to make it even better. Then reaching our Lone Planeswalker upgrade, we'll be swapping out Vivien Champion of the Wilds, who is very powerful but unable to reach her full potential here due to our unimpressive creature base, and adding in Chandra Fire Artisan in her place, who serves as another source of continual impulse draw and whose burn on loyalty loss can be used as a deterrent to prevent our opponents from attacking her unless they're willing to get burned. And finally, reaching our land swaps, the Tapland Highland Forest will be replaced with Rockfall Vale to help speed up our mana base while still providing fixing, and the Manland Raging Ravine will be cut to make room for Oran Reef the Vastwood, which is a cheap and repeatable source of counter distribution from the land slot to grow our wolf tokens and other creatures as they come into play. So, now that we've covered all 30 cards we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 29 creatures including the commander, 5 instants, 15 sorceries, 6 enchantments, 7 artifacts, 2 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 37 cards that allow us to play/cast them or others from Exile, 5 cards that care about cards being cast or played from Exile, 4 cards that can produce and or care about wolf tokens, and 11 sources of single target or AoE pump, leaving us with a substantial number of cards that we can play and cast from Exile to enable our commander, alongside a handful of payoffs to get even more value out of them, additional ways to get more wolf tokens and get more value out of our wolf tokens, and finally, a good number of cards to power up our wolves to take them from measly 2/2s and turn them into gigantic threats that can close out games for us. For general deck stats, we have 19 ramp sources, 20 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes. Our ramp and draw being insanely high since we'll need to impulse draw and then cast those spells as often as possible to proc our commander as much as we can, and our removal and wipes falling within more normal ratios. Looking at our mana curve, we have 3 1-drops, 17 2-drops, 18 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 8 5-drops, 4 6-drops, and 2 7-drops. Giving us a fairly aggressive curve that aims to ramp hard to get our commander out quickly, along with the mana we need to cast any spell we impulse draw into, letting none go to waste to flood our board with wolves as quickly as possible. The final price then comes out to be $74.30 after upgrades. This price does not include tax and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For further upgrades, Birgi God of Storytelling would make a superb addition thanks to her backface, Harnfell Horn of Bounty, which is a better version of our commander's activated ability that actually nets us cards instead of just cantripping. Chandra Torch of Defiance is another impulse-drawing planeswalker worth considering that can also be used as ramp and removal. And Orin Frostfang can take advantage of our wide board states by forcing our opponents to either let our attacks through and draw us cards, or block our tokens and lose their blockers due to their death touch. And finally, if price is no option, Grenzo Havoc Razor is another superb payoff for our wide board states that lets us exile even more cards off our opponent's decks to cast, while Craterhoof Behemoth is a powerful finisher for our token-heavy build to help close out games out of nowhere, their impact on the board and our wallets being quite significant. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Before we continue, I'd first like to thank every one of our subscribers that helped us crack the 5K milestone. I can't believe how quickly the channel's been growing in the past few months, and it certainly wouldn't have been possible without all of your support. So sincerely, thank you, and I hope you continue to support the channel in the future. So, with the last of the precons covered, our next build, according to the results of last week's poll, will be featuring Baraka's party leader and the folk hero background. So look forward to a party-themed build featuring him next week. Then looking at this week's poll, we'll be going back to the main sets to give some of those commanders a shot at a build featuring them, with this week's contenders being Quasar Augur of Agonies, Miriam Sentinel Worm, and a commander background pairing of Gale Waterdeep Prodigy and Scion of Halaster. Please cast your vote in the community tab, link in the description, and let me know which commanders from Streets of New Capenna or Battle for Baldur's Gate you want to see on future polls. Before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.